This story is part of a new collection about the women of the American Revolution. These women were not included in the original book, but their courage, sacrifice, and service to the cause of American independence deserve to be remembered and shared. Women of the American Revolution. Penelope Barker, the patriot who led the Edenton Tea Party. On October 25th, 1774, 51 women of Edenton, North Carolina, placed their names beneath a public promise. They would resist British policy by refusing imported tea and cloth. They did not destroy property, hide their identities, or leave their purpose uncertain. Their weapon was a disciplined boycott, and their pledge carried signatures. Penelope Barker, an experienced manager of households, land, and business, played the leading role. Months before Lexington and Concord, and nearly 2 years before independence, Barker and her neighbors showed that household purchases could become acts of constitutional resistance. They defended the principle that Parliament should not tax Americans who had no representatives there. Their action became the Edenton Tea Party, one of America's earliest recorded public political acts organized by women. Penelope Paget was born in Edenton on June 17, 1728, into a North Carolina family. Her father, Samuel Paget, was a physician and planter. Her mother, Elizabeth Blount Paget, belonged to a family active in Chowan County affairs. Edenton was a busy port and government town connected to Britain by ships, trade, law, and correspondence. Responsibility came early. While Penelope was still a teenager, her father and older sister Elizabeth died. She helped care for Elizabeth's 3 children and, in 1745, married their widowed father, attorney John Hodgson. Penelope and Hodgson had 2 sons, but he died in 1747. At 19, she managed 5 children and plantation property, duties requiring accounts, crops, labor, supplies, and decisions. She married planter James Craven in 1751 and was widowed again in 1755, inheriting a substantial estate. In 1757, she married Thomas Barker, a respected Edenton attorney and assemblyman. Their 3 children died in infancy. In 1761, Thomas sailed to London to represent the North Carolina Assembly. War and the British blockade kept him abroad until 1778. For 17 years, Penelope directed the family's affairs. The Barker estates depended partly on enslaved labor, a fact belonging to the complete record of the property she managed. By 1774, the dispute between Britain and its colonies had moved beyond isolated complaints. Parliament's Tea Act preserved a tax that many colonists believed violated their rights while favoring the East India Company. The Boston Tea Party followed in December 1773. Parliament answered with the coercive acts, closing Boston's port and restricting Massachusetts' government. Americans feared that punishment imposed on one colony could threaten all. North Carolina answered through organized representative action. 71 delegates met at New Bern from August 25th through 27, 1774, in defiance of royal authority. The First Provincial Congress supported Massachusetts, selected Continental Congress delegates, and pledged cooperation with united colonial measures. On October 20th, the Continental Congress adopted the Continental Association, calling for a boycott of British goods. The Edenton women acted within this growing movement. Tea and cloth were practical choices. Women supervised much household purchasing and labor that could replace imports. Refusing tea meant surrendering a familiar social custom. Refusing English cloth meant more spinning, weaving, mending, and homespun production. A boycott written by public leaders could succeed only if families practiced it. Barker understood that economic discipline gave political resolutions their strength. The Edenton Resolution declared that the women could not remain indifferent when their country's peace and happiness were endangered. They owed a duty, they said, to their families and themselves. By subscribing the paper, they offered what it called a witness of their fixed intention and solemn determination. Those words were measured and serious. The signers promised personal sacrifice in support of the public good, not disorder. Another account of their pledge made the commitment clearer. The women would abandon what they called the pernicious custom of drinking tea and would not encourage English manufactures until the offending acts were repealed. Principle was joined to conduct. Each signer accepted responsibility for what entered her home, what her family wore, and what merchants could expect her to buy. Tradition held that all 51 women gathered at Elizabeth King's home, drank local herbal beverages, and signed together while Barker presided. Modern historians treat that scene cautiously. The house was probably too small, and the document may indicate that the agreement circulated for signatures. Some women may have met in smaller groups. The exact room is uncertain, but the resolution, date, names, and public commitment are not. The real story needs no picturesque afternoon around one table. Its importance rests on coordination. 51 women agreed upon a common course, allowed their identities to be published, and tied household choices to colonial rights. Organizing so many signatures across households required trust, reputation, and persistence. Barker had developed all three through years of managing complicated family and business affairs. The signers also rejected anonymity. Men at Boston had disguised themselves during the destruction of tea, and anonymous essays were common. The Edenton women chose another courage. Their names made the pledge enforceable by honor and reputation. Neighbors, merchants, officials, and relatives could see who had promised to refuse British goods. In a small port town, that accountability carried weight. The resolution did not claim that women held office or possessed a formal vote. It began from duties they already exercised. The signers knew their work, and purchases sustained households and influenced commerce. They therefore accepted responsibility for defending the liberty and welfare of their country. Their protest was rooted in family, community, and the inherited rights of British Americans. No modern political label is needed to recognize its courage. News traveled quickly. The Virginia Gazette printed the declaration on November 3, 1774. Reports crossed the Atlantic, where London readers learned that North Carolina women had entered the imperial argument. In January 1775, the Morning Chronicle and London Advertiser reported the action. On March 25th, publishers Robert Sayer and John Bennett issued Philip Dawes' satirical print, A Society of Patriotic Ladies at Edenton in North Carolina. The caricature portrayed the women as foolish, disorderly, and unfit for public judgment. Its purpose was ridicule, not reporting. Yet the attack proved the boycott had been noticed. An empire that considered the women harmless would not spend ink and talent mocking them. The satire tried to shame them into silence. Their signed resolution answered more firmly. They had stated their purpose and accepted the consequences. The Edenton action belonged to a larger patriot effort. Women elsewhere rejected imported tea, organized spinning gatherings, wore homespun, raised supplies, and maintained families while men served. Barker's contribution was to make that support public and collective before the war began. She turned household decisions into a visible pledge of resistance. War arrived in April 1775. North Carolina Patriots defeated Loyalists at Moores Creek Bridge in February 1776. That April, the Halifax Resolves made North Carolina the first colony to direct its delegates to support independence. The declaration followed in July. Barker commanded no troops, but the discipline represented by the Edenton boycott helped prepare communities for war's larger sacrifices. During the war, Barker continued managing property and household, while Thomas remained in Europe. He returned by way of France in 1778. In 1782, the Barkers built the Edenton House, later associated with their name. Thomas died in 1789. Penelope lived 7 more years and died in 1796. She was buried beside him near Edenton. Her house, moved to the waterfront in the 20th century, now welcomes visitors. For a time, the Tea Party faded from local memory. In 1827, an Edenton naval officer found a version of the British cartoon overseas, renewing interest. Later generations filled gaps with attractive legends. Careful history separates tradition from documented fact while preserving the achievement that matters. 51 named women publicly supported resistance to British imports, and Penelope Barker played a central organizing role. Penelope Barker mattered to the American Revolution because she understood that liberty requires more than speeches. It requires citizens willing to govern their own conduct, keep their word, and bear a personal cost for a shared principle. She used no official title and commanded no army. She used reputation, organization, purchasing power, and public accountability. The Edenton women showed that resistance could begin at the household table and still be heard across an ocean. Their promise linked constitutional rights with daily duty, and their signatures placed honor behind their words. When Americans remember the road to independence, Penelope Barker deserves recognition as the patriot who helped 51 women stand openly before their neighbors and the British Empire, resolved that the freedom of their country was also their responsibility.